It is sweltering out here. I will not pretend otherwise. We are right in the thick of it now. These are the longest days with the harshest sun, the kind of heat that makes a person want to just sit in the shade of the porch and let the garden fend for itself. I will tell you plainly, a great many gardens simply quit in the middle of the summer. The spring crops are exhausted. The heat beats down whatever remains. The bugs arrive in thick swarms, and the entire thing looks tired and finished by the end of July. But here is the thing the old-timers knew that most people have forgotten. July is not the conclusion of the garden. July is when you plant the second half of it. What you put in the ground right now, in the worst of the heat, is what determines whether your garden fails you in August or whether it feeds your family all the way into the fall and the first cold. The work you do now, sweating under this sun, is the difference between an empty bed come October and a table full of food when the frost is on the pumpkins. I farm a piece of ground in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, that my family has worked since 1838. One of the first things my grandfather taught me about a garden was that a wise gardener is always thinking one season ahead. When you are eating from the spring planting, you are already putting in the fall one. The garden never stops, it only turns. So today, I am going to walk you through 5 things you want to get in the ground this month, in July, so that you keep eating long after the lazy gardens have given up and gone to weeds. I remember my grandmother out in the garden on a July evening, after the heat of the day had finally let go of its grip, working down a row on her knees in the cool of the dusk, putting in seed while the rest of the world thought the garden season was as good as over. I was a boy, and I did not understand it. I asked her why she was planting when everything was already grown. She looked up at me and said, "Child, this is not for now. This is for November." She was not planting for the table that week. She was planting for the table 3 months later, when the killing cold had taken every other garden in the valley, and ours was still green under the frost cloth. That is the whole secret, and it is no secret at all. It is only thinking ahead and being willing to do a little work in the heat for a reward that comes long after. Before I go any further, I will say this once. I gathered all of these old ways of keeping a garden going through the year into a book. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. The string bean is the easiest thing to plant. July is a difficult month to start most things directly in the garden because of the heat, sun, and bugs. But the string bean does not care about any of that nearly as much as the rest. That is exactly why it is such a good thing to sow right now. You do not have to fuss with starting it inside in a tray and moving it out. You put the seeds straight in the ground where they are to grow, and they come up and grow as easily as anything. That is what we call direct sowing, and beans are made for it. The other benefit of the bean is that it is not much troubled by pests or disease. If your tomatoes, cucumbers, and squash are being chewed to ribbons and covered in spots this time of year, and they often are, the beans go on untroubled beside them. In all my years, I can hardly remember a disease taking my beans. I have never had to fuss over them the way I fuss over the tender crops. They just grow. There is a reason for it, and it is worth understanding. The bean makes its own food, in a manner of speaking, down in the roots, where it takes what it needs from the very air in the soil. So, it is not as hungry or as fussy as the heavy feeders, like your corn and your squash. Its leaf is tougher, and its whole nature is hardier. The heat that stalls a tomato and the bugs that swarm a cucumber pass the bean by. When everything else in the July garden is struggling, The bean is the one crop you can count on to carry the load. That alone is reason enough to keep a row of it going. Now, there is one thing to know, and it depends on where you live. If you are up north or anywhere, the summers are shorter and milder. You can just go out and sow your beans right now and not think twice about it. They will be fine. But if you are down south or out west, where the sun is a hammer and the heat does not let up, that hard sun can toughen the bean up, making the pods a little chewy, still good to eat, but not as tender. So, if you garden in that fierce sun, sow your beans, but give them a bit of shade cloth over the top, a light cloth stretched on some hoops, or a simple frame to break the worst of the sun off the young plants. If you are not sure whether you need it, put the shade cloth on anyway. You lose nothing. You can always pull it off later if you find they want more sun. It is better to have it and not need it. Potatoes are the next thing, and you will be sorry if you skip them. I have shown before how I plant my potatoes, the deep planting, the cut seed, and all of it. So I will not go over the whole process again here. What matters for right now, for a July planting, is the timing, because a potato put in this month gives you a fall crop that will feed you right through the winter. There is not a better storage crop in all the garden. You grow them until the frost cuts the tops down, or until the vines die back on their own, and then you dig them, cure them, and lay them by. They will keep in a cool, dark cellar or garage for months. My fall potatoes last me clear into the spring. Here is how you reckon the timing, and you reckon it off your own first frost, wherever you are. If your first frost comes early, say the tail end of September or the first part of October, then get your seed potatoes in the ground in early July. That gives them a couple of weeks to break the surface, and then a good 2 months to grow and set decent potatoes underneath before the cold. If you are cutting it close, do not fret over a light frost, because it only kills the tops. The potatoes themselves are safe down in the dark ground. If you see the plants pushing up and a hard frost is coming, just mound a little more soil or mulch over them to keep them protected. But if your first frost holds off until late October or into November, the way it often does in my part of the country, where I reckon on the middle of October and sometimes later, then you are better off waiting and planting in the back half of July. The reason is that a potato does not care for it being too hot. If you plant into the worst of the August heat, the plant sulks. So, I set my seed potatoes out first on a counter or a shelf in indirect light, not in the sun. I let them sit there a week or two until the eyes wake up and put out good, short, stout sprouts. Then I plant them at the end of the month, and they come up in the cooler part of the season and grow on happily through September and October. If you need seed to plant, you have 3 plain ways to get it. 1, you can buy proper seed potatoes, which are grown for planting and will sprout quickly and true. 2, you can go to the store and buy organic potatoes, because those have not been sprayed with the chemical that stops sprouting. You can set them out to green up and sprout, or even plant them straight away. 3, go look in the back of your own pantry, because nearly everyone has a forgotten potato back there that has already started sprouting. That one you can plant directly. The one thing you cannot do is grab an ordinary store potato that is not sprouted, because most of those have been treated to keep them from sprouting on the shelf. One of those planted may just sit and rot in the ground before it ever comes up. But if an ordinary potato has already sprouted on its own in your pantry, then the treatment has worn off and it is safe to plant. There is no excuse. Everyone can find a potato to put in the ground. Basil is the 3rd thing to plant in July. Now is just the right time to start a second wave of it. If you planted basil back in the spring, it is very likely starting to bolt on you about now, which is to say, it is trying to flower and go to seed. Once it does that, the leaves turn bitter, and the plant is nearly done. If you never got around to planting basil at all, start your first wave right now, and you will still get a fine crop. Basil is one of the easiest, least troublesome things you can grow, and it gives you your choice of how to start it. You can sow it straight in the ground, or you can start it in a tray and move it out, whichever suits you. I start mine in trays inside because we get hard-driving rains here that will wash a fine little basil seed right out of the ground. But if your rains are gentler, sow it straight out and save yourself the trouble. The reason to start that second wave now is so you always have young, vigorous plants coming on behind the older ones. The heat of July starts beating up the spring basil, and even if you keep cutting it back, it is wise to have fresh, young plants growing alongside that are more willing to hold off on bolting. That is the old rule, and it is a good one. Always keep two crops of basil going, an older and a younger, and you hedge your bets and never go without. There are different kinds of basil to grow. There is your common sweet basil, the kind for the kitchen that most folks know, and you can find types of it bred to stand up better against the mildew that comes in damp weather, which is worth seeking out if your falls turn wet, and your basil has died of it before. Grow a few kinds if you like variety, but whatever you grow, tend to your older plants while you are at it. Walk down the row and look for any that are sending up flower heads and pinch or cut those heads off back down to the next set of leaves. Those leaves below will take over and grow on, and cutting off the flowering that way will stretch the life of the plant a good while longer. Romaine lettuce is the fourth thing, and people are always surprised by this one. Most people think of lettuce as a cold weather crop, and they are half right. But the truth is, your romaine does not want a frost on it. A hard frost or a freeze will damage the heads. What it wants is to come to size in the cool of the fall, when the days have gone mild and the nights have gone cool, but the real cold has not yet come. To make that happen, you have to start it now, while it is still warm, so it is ready to finish in that sweet, cool stretch of autumn. The way you manage it is by starting your seeds inside, where it is not so brutally hot, and then setting the young plants out into the garden once the weather has begun to turn. You are getting a jump on the season. Reckon it, again, off your own first frost. If your frost comes at the end of September or early October, start your romaine seeds inside in early July, because the little plants want 4 to 6 weeks to grow before they go out, and then set them into the garden along about the middle of August. That gives them 6 to 8 weeks to grow into good big heads before the cold. If an early frost threatens, throw a light cover over them, a frost blanket, or a length of garden fabric, and it will keep the frost off and the heads pristine. But if your frost holds off until late October or November, as mine tends to, then wait and start your romaine seeds toward the very end of July, and set the plants out in the beginning to middle of September, once the worst heat has finally broken. They will grow through the back half of September and into October, and give you a fine harvest before any hard cold. If it is still hot when your young plants go out, start them under a bit of that shade cloth, 40% shade or so, to take the edge off until the weather cools. It gives you a few weeks of protection in case the heat lingers or your timing runs a little ahead. I will tell you plainly, a fall romaine is a better thing than a spring one. The spring lettuce comes to size just as the weather is warming, and warm weather makes lettuce bitter and loose. But the fall romaine matures as the nights are turning cool, and that gives you a sweeter, crisper, more tender head every time. If you have never grown your lettuce on into the fall, do it this year. With a heavy enough garden fabric over them to keep the hard frost and freeze off, romaine will take a surprising amount of cold and carry on well into the winter. But you must keep that killing frost off the leaves, because even a light frost forming right on an unprotected leaf will do it harm. Another wave of cucumbers and zucchini is the fifth and last thing to plant in July. These belong to the same family, and they all share the same nature, which is that they come up fast, they grow fast, they fruit fast, and then they die fast. If you try to nurse one of these plants along all summer long, you will only be disappointed because they are not made to last. A cucumber vine or a zucchini plant has maybe 2 or 3 months in it, and then, beaten down by the heat, humidity, and bugs, it gives out, no matter how well you tend it. The answer is not to fight that. The answer is to work with it, the way the old market growers did. That is called succession planting. You put in a fresh crop every 4 to 6 weeks, right through the season, so that you always have young plants coming into their prime just as the older ones are quitting. I had cucumbers a few weeks back that were the picture of health, pumping out fruit like they would never stop. Now, a mere 3 or 4 weeks later, they are mostly spent and pulled. That is just the way of them. But because I have a fresh tray of young plants ready to go in the ground, I will never be without. As the old vines reach their end, the new ones are climbing and about to fruit, and the harvest never breaks. So, put your new cucumbers and zucchini in now, and plan to put more in again in another month, and again after that. Set them where a spent crop has come out, a bed where the early potatoes were dug, or where a tired tomato has finished, so long as you are not planting the very same family right back on the same spot too tight, which spreads disease. Keep young plants always coming on every 4 to 6 weeks, and you will pick cucumbers and squash right up until the frost finally ends it. Now, let me say a plain word about the whole of this, because it is the real lesson underneath all 5 of these crops. You are not a slave to the weather. That is what I want you to carry away from this. Too many folks look at a hard summer or an early winter and just throw up their hands and let the season beat them. But a gardener has tools, simple ones, that let him bend the season to his will a little. When it is too hot, a length of shade cloth over some hoops cools things down enough to start your crops early. When the cold comes on, a length of garden fabric thrown over the beds keeps the frost off and lets you grow weeks, even months, later than you thought you cold. Shade cloth buys you the early end. Fabric buys you the late end. Put the two together, and you have added a great long stretch to your growing year on both ends with nothing more than some cloth and a few hoops, and the knowing of when to use them. I will tell you who profits from you not knowing this, though it is not much of a villain, so do not expect one. There is simply no money in a man planting a second garden from seed he saved, and covering it with a scrap of old cloth. Nobody gets rich off you eating out of your own yard clear into December. The whole trade is set up to sell you your vegetables in the store in the dead of winter, trucked in from far off, and there is no salesman anywhere with a reason to teach you to grow your own instead. It is not that anyone is hiding it from you. It is only that no one profits by teaching it, and so it quietly slips away, one generation forgetting a little more than the last. That is the whole of it. No scheme. The money just runs the other way. So, there are your 5. Sow your string beans, for they are tough and easy, and the bugs leave them be. Get your fall potatoes in, early or late, by your own frost, for a storage crop to carry you through the winter. Start a second wave of basil, so you never run short. Start your romaine now to finish sweet in the cool of the fall. And keep putting in cucumbers and zucchini every few weeks, so the harvest never quits. Do that in the heat of July, while the lazy gardens are giving up, and you will be eating from your ground long after they have gone to weeds. Tell me down in the comments what county you garden in, and when your first frost usually comes, because that is the number that decides all your timing. And it is a good thing for your neighbors here to see how it varies from one place to the next. And tell me what you are planting this month for the fall. I am always glad to learn what does well in another man's ground. Next time out here, I want to show you how to build a proper compost pile the old way, layer upon layer through the season, so that by the time you are planting again, you have your own black, crumbly gold to feed all these crops with and never have to buy a bag of anything. That is the thing that makes all the rest of it work. But for now, remember this. The garden does not end in July. It only turns. Plant now in the worst of the heat, and you will eat in the best of the fall. The people who built this country with their hands knew that. And we are only just starting to remember it. If this story changes the way you look at the midsummer heat in your garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history and the wisdom that they tried to bury. Let's plant the future together. The next treasure from the soil will be revealed soon.